In 1918, deep in the Argonne forest of France, a single American soldier stood, surrounded by enemy machine guns. His name was Alvin York, and what he did next would defy military logic, human endurance, and even his own beliefs. He was a humble farmer from Tennessee, a man who'd spent most of his life plowing rocky soil, hunting wild game, and wrestling with his conscience about what was right and wrong in a world at war. Yet, in the space of a few hours, he would become one of the most decorated soldiers in American history, a legend whose story still echoes more than a century later. Alvin York was born in 1887 in Pall Mall, Tennessee, a remote farming town nestled in the Cumberland Mountains. Life there was tough. His family was large. His father was a blacksmith and farmer, and from a young age, Alvin learned the value of hard work. But he also developed a reputation as a crack shot. He could hit a squirrel's eye with his rifle from 100 yards, and in those rural communities, that skill was more survival than sport. Still, York's youth wasn't saintly. He drank heavily, gambled, and often found himself in fights. By his own admission, he was headed nowhere good. Then, in 1915, his life changed completely. After his father died, York took on the responsibility of caring for his mother and younger siblings. One night, after a particularly wild drinking spree that ended in a brawl, York was invited to a revival meeting in a small mountain church. There he felt what he called the hand of God guiding him away from violence and sin. He quit drinking, gave up fighting, and devoted himself to his faith. York became a deeply religious man, a member of a small pacifist denomination that believed killing was always wrong, no matter the reason. So when the United States entered World War I in 1917, and the draft came calling, Alvin York faced the hardest decision of his life. He didn't want to go. He filed for conscientious objector status, citing his faith, but the government denied his request. His church wasn't officially recognized as pacifist by the War Department, and his claim was rejected. The army wanted soldiers, not sermons, and so York found himself drafted into the 82nd Division, shipped off to Camp Gordon, Georgia, and placed in uniform. At first, he resisted everything about army life. He refused to train on Sundays, refused to practice shooting, and even told his superiors that if ordered to kill, he simply couldn't do it. But his commanders, particularly Captain Danforth and Major Buxton, saw something in him. They didn't punish York for his beliefs. Instead, they sat down with him, opened their Bibles, and debated scripture late into the night. They showed him passages where soldiers had fought in defense of the innocent. For the first time, York began to see the possibility that maybe God's will wasn't against all fighting. Maybe it was against injustice. He prayed for days before making his decision, and one morning he woke with clarity. He would go to war, not out of hate but out of duty. As he said later, "I've got no quarrel with them Germans, but I'm in it because I've got to be. I'll do my part." In the spring of 1918, York and his division sailed for France. He'd never been outside Tennessee before, and now he was trudging through the mud and blood of the Western Front. The Meuse-Argonne offensive began that October, the largest operation the U.S. Army had ever undertaken, with more than 1 million American soldiers fighting to break through German lines. York's unit, part of the 82nd Division, was ordered to capture a heavily fortified ridge near the town of Châtel-Chehery. The morning of October 8, 1918, was cold, grey, and soaked in fog. York's platoon, under the command of Sergeant Bernard Early, was tasked with flanking a series of German machine gun nests that had pinned down American forces. As they crept through the forest, the group stumbled upon a pocket of German soldiers and managed to capture several of them. But moments later, the ridge erupted in gunfire. Hidden machine guns opened up from all sides. The Americans dove for cover, but within seconds 6 men were dead and 3 officers were hit. The chain of command collapsed, and Alvin York, a corporal, suddenly found himself in charge of the survivors. Pinned down behind a small ridge, York faced an impossible situation. Around him, 30 German machine guns poured out a storm of bullets. The air was alive with death, but instead of retreating, York started to move. Crawling forward through the mud, picking off enemy gunners one by one. Years of hunting turkeys in the Tennessee woods had taught him to shoot calmly and precisely. He aimed for the ones farthest away first, so the closer ones wouldn't see their comrades fall. Every shot counted. In his own words, York later said, "I just couldn't miss." When 6 German soldiers charged him with bayonets, he stood up, aimed, and dropped each of them in succession. When his rifle ran dry, he pulled out his Colt .45 pistol and kept firing. Within minutes, the forest fell eerily silent, except for York's steady breathing. The German commander, Lieutenant Paul Jürgen Vollmer, realizing his men were being cut down, shouted out to York to stop shooting. York ordered him to surrender. Vollmer hesitated until York pointed his pistol and said, "You do it now, or I'll kill you all." Vollmer gave the order. Moments later, dozens of German soldiers emerged from their positions, hands raised. By the time it was over, Alvin York and his small squad of 7 remaining men had captured 132 German soldiers, including 4 officers, and had silenced 35 machine guns. York marched them back through miles of enemy territory, using the prisoners themselves as cover to protect his men. When they reached American lines, officers thought it was a mistake. "How many prisoners did you say?" one asked. 132, York replied quietly. The military was stunned. Newspapers back home called it one of the greatest single acts of bravery in modern warfare. For his actions, York was promoted to sergeant and awarded the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, the French Croix de Guerre, and several other international medals for gallantry. But to Alvin York, it wasn't heroism, it was providence. He told reporters, "It was the hand of God. He guided my shots." When he returned to Tennessee, York was greeted as a national hero. The people of his small mountain town threw him a parade, and newspapers declared him the greatest soldier of the Great War. Offers poured in from all over, movie deals, book contracts, product endorsements. But York turned them all down. He said he didn't fight for fame or money. He fought because he had to. Instead, he used his newfound recognition to build a school for poor children in his community. Education, he believed, was the true weapon against ignorance and conflict. In the years that followed, Alvin York remained a quiet man. He farmed his land, raised his children, and spoke out against war, even as he supported America's troops. When World War II broke out, he was too old to fight, but he helped with the draft effort, urging young men to serve their country honorably. York lived until 1964, passing away at the age of 76. His tombstone in Tennessee bears a simple inscription, "Life is not ours, it is God's." Alvin York's story isn't just about one man's courage. It's about conviction, the kind that comes from faith, morality, and the understanding that true heroism isn't about how many enemies you defeat, but how many lives you save while standing for what's right. In the end, he was still the same farmer who had once hunted turkeys in the hills of Tennessee. Only this time, his rifle had changed history. And in a war that devoured millions of lives, Alvin York reminded the world that a single man, driven by faith and courage, can still make all the difference.